Hey there, this is Christine. Thanks so much for tuning into my Mostly Keto Kitchen. Today I want to talk about ketoacidosis. And I often get asked this question, should I be concerned about ketoacidosis? So if you've heard of it, you know that it's a very serious condition and people can die from it. So it's important to know about it, but it's also important to understand why it's not really an issue for the majority of us. So if you recall, in the liver, you can have that little E-shaped thing, which is your triglyceride. That is going to get broken down into glucose and ketones. So the glycerol backbone here is what turns into the glucose, and then the fatty acid chains get turned into ketones. I've got two different ketones drawn here. This one is acetoacetate, and that guy over there is beta hydroxybutyrate. And I've boxed the areas that have the OHs that are next to a carbon double bond. And so that's what we call an acid group. And the H's that are part of those acid groups, they can leave the molecule. And so they turn into just a little proton, like a little H plus. And that creates a lower pH, so it's an increase in hydrogen ion concentration, and that's a lower pH. And a lower pH can be very serious for us. So our bodies keep our blood pH a very, very tight range. And so if the blood pH drops too low, then a lot of bad things can happen. So anyway, let's talk a little bit. That's really, where the acid part comes from, is from those acid groups. But let's get into the bloodstream here. So we've got glucose molecule and we've got some little ketone bodies. Those guys are going to go into the bloodstream and then they're going to go through the blood and then they're going to be taken up by the cells to be used for energy. So the glucose, remember, the way it gets taken up by a cell is through insulin. Insulin serves as a key that helps to open up the cell to let the glucose in. Now, that doesn't have to happen for the ketone body. So you don't need insulin for that process. It's kind of a side note. The ketone body can just pass through the cell membrane and come into the cell. But here's the important part. So we need insulin to bring that glucose into the cell. The glucose came from the breakdown of the triglyceride. Now, if you start getting to the point that you've got so much glucose in your bloodstream, you've produced a lot of insulin saying, hey, we're trying to get the glucose into the cells. That insulin also goes back and puts a brake on this process of creating the glucose and the ketones. Remember, this comes from one molecule here, and so when you make the glucose, you make the ketones. When you block making the glucose, you also are blocking making the ketones. So insulin is really important for putting the brakes on, and that's the little symbol that I have here. It's kind of like a, stop. So it stops us from making more glucose and more ketones. So as long as you have a normal insulin production, or you're making insulin like you should, then ketosis is perfectly safe for you, all right? And if you've got other medical conditions, definitely go see your doctor. But if you're normal, you're healthy, there's no doctor needed in order for you to start going down the path of trying out some ketosis. Now remember, there's keto flu, so you can feel kind of sick as you get started doing it because your body is not used to this process. If you've just been eating carbs and eating too much, then you haven't had a chance to take your fat out of fat stores and start breaking it down. So you can feel a little funky, and if it makes you more comfortable having your doctor be involved, by all means do it. But the issue of ketoacidosis, that's not going to happen as long as you've got a normal insulin response. Now, who doesn't have normal insulin? Well, definitely type 1 diabetics. And ketoacidosis can be deathly for people who don't yet know that they are type 1 diabetics. So for example, in countries maybe they don't have top-notch healthcare, and maybe children that are developing it, and all of a sudden their ketone levels get too high because the insulin is not being produced. That is super serious. Also in type 2 diabetics, and this is really where the tough part is, because ketosis, making ketones and using them, is so important for people who are type 2 diabetics. However, and they can kind of fall into a couple categories. People that are very, very, very far along in type 2 diabetes, they are not producing, their pancreas will stop producing insulin, in which case they're kind of in the same boat as a type 1 diabetic. And so very important that they have a doctor involved and figure out, and I am not a doctor, so I'm not sure how they go about it, but if you are, sort of very far along in type 2 diabetes, you would want to talk to your doctor before trying a ketogenic diet. People who are on metformin or sulfonylurea, those people are making insulin normally. So the metformin is going to help increase the cell sensitivity to the insulin. yes, the insulin is going to be, cells are going to be more sensitive to the insulin if they take metformin, and the sulfonylurea, it's going to help the pancreas produce more insulin. Okay, so in both cases, you're kind of fiddling with insulin a little bit. My feeling on that would be talk to your doctor, but it may just be a matter that as you start eating more of a ketogenic diet and you're needing less insulin, then you can decrease your meds, but you would want to have your doctor help you make that decision. So anyway, I hope this was useful information, and if you let me know if you've got any questions or thoughts about it. I'd like to hear your comments. So thanks so much for listening.